My name is Lee Davis. I work in the Office of Regulatory Policy with FinCEN, and today I'm going to discuss 4 different things. We're going to talk about the MSB Definitions final rule that came out toward the end of July, the Prepaid Access final rule that came out about a week after that, and also FinCEN's recent BSA E-Filing initiatives and the Agent Request Initiative that's been going on. So, as many of you know, FinCEN's mission is to protect the U.S. financial system and from money laundering and against terrorist financing. We administer the Bank Secrecy Act, and we implement the regulations that are put in place under that. Basically, we are here to ensure financial transparency and reporting appropriately for law enforcement. So I think the first thing I'm going to talk about is the recent MSB Definitions final rule that came out. Basically, since FinCEN was established in 1990, MSBs, money services businesses, have been growing in the U.S. economy in terms of how much money moves through them, how much effect they have on the economy, and the volume and the size of transactions that they see. So we recently revised the regulations that govern MSBs, and we think that what's happened is that what we've come out with clarifies who is an MSB, who has to register with FinCEN, and what exactly we mean by these various terms that we throw around. So this slide lists the different categories of MSBs as they exist today. You've got a dealer in foreign exchange, check casher, issuer or seller of traveler's checks or money orders, a provider of prepaid access. This one is one of the new terms that came out with the prepaid access rule. It used to be called stored value, but basically the industry has moved on and are not happy with stored value anymore, so we tried to, about 5 years too late, catch up and make our terms match what the industry was actually using. Then you've got money transmitters, which is obviously of greater concern to this crowd probably, the U.S. Postal Service, which is a special category, and sellers of prepaid access. So for prepaid access, there are 2 different categories of obligated entities, and I'm going to discuss that more later when I talk specifically about the prepaid access final rule. So about 12 years have passed since FinCEN issued the BSA regulations that govern money services businesses. Over that time, the MSB industry, the many MSB industries, it's not just one, have changed a great deal. As I mentioned earlier, the volume of business has grown, type of transactions has changed somewhat. And over that time, we, as FinCEN, have had the opportunity to opine in a variety of opinions and administrative rulings on exactly what we meant under the regulations by certain of the definitions or certain of the requirements. And so that has generated a fairly large body of extra rules that are outside the official regulations. And so part of this effort, the MSB Definitions final rule that came out recently, was an effort to codify in the regulations all of those extra rulings, opinions, and clarifications that we'd put out over the years. So a little short history lesson. So in 1999, the MSB definitions regulations were first put in place, and then we came out with an NPRM, a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, to revise them in 2009. And you might think that this is a fairly long period between when we put out the notice and when the final rules came out. And that was because during that period of time, we wanted to wait to make sure that the MSB definitions matched our prepaid access final rules, which took a little bit longer than we expected. There seemed to be a lot of furor over that one. It took a little while to get the final language set. So then the final rule finally came out in July 21st, 2011. And the preambles to both the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking and the final rulemaking are a very good resource to look to if you want to get more detail on any of the things I'm talking about. We discuss the rationale behind the rules, the changes, and exactly what's happened. So if you're interested in looking at that, those documents are all available on our website or through the Federal Register, but our website is probably vastly easier to find the documents on. And also there are various administrative rulings that affect them can be found there. So actually turning to what the new regulations does, we think the final rule more clearly defines the various categories of MSBs so that various obligated industries have a better chance of knowing where you fall under the rules, what your obligations are, and what you're required to do. So, for example, one of the things we did was we renamed one of the categories, which used to be currency dealer or exchanger. Now it's dealer and foreign exchange. And I think that more clearly matches what we intend to cover by the regulations, because it is foreign exchange that we're talking about, not just someone who exchanges bills within U.S. currency. So if you are changing, 100 ones for 250s, that's not what we intended to cover by the regulations. Not to say that there aren't concerns with that type of activity. I think everyone can obviously figure out what those concerns are, but those concerns are not what we intended to address and cover under the category of dealer and foreign exchange. We also addressed certain foreign located entities. Many businesses that are not located in the U.S. but which serve U.S. customers have for a long time been registered with FinCEN as MSBs, but we have never clarified exactly what we intend with regard to entities located outside of the U.S. And with the rise of the internet and the ability to conduct transactions regardless of physical location, this has become a much greater issue. And so we wanted to clarify that foreign located entities that serve U.S. customers are obligated under our rules. And we have also added requirements that I'll talk about it a little later, some additional obligations for foreign located MSBs. As I mentioned, we've incorporated past guidance and rulemakings so that everything is in the regulations and you don't have to wade through 200 or 300 documents to find what all the rules are. And we've also, the MSB definitions final rule made a few clerical changes that set up the prepaid access rule, sort of made a place for those rules to go. One thing that the rule discusses but does not do anything with is the daily transaction thresholds that apply to money services businesses. For most money services businesses, there's a $1,000 threshold for daily activity. before any entity is obligated under the rules. That doesn't apply to money transmitters. Money transmitters have a $0 threshold, so for you, this may not be such an issue, but there is discussion in the final rule about changing those thresholds. And as you can imagine, many entities wanted us to raise it, law enforcement wanted us to lower it, and as usual, we're sort of stuck in the middle. And at this point, we're not changing those thresholds at all. They're staying at the $1,000 level for all of the entities except for money transmitters and certain thresholds that I'll discuss later about prepaid access. So before I get into the specific changes, I also wanted to discuss who's not covered by these regulations. Because we have added this emphasis on the foreign located MSBs, we had to expand the limitations somewhat. So before, we always exempted banks and SEC or CFTC regulated entities. Those entities are covered by a separate set of rules. They're not MSBs. Because we've focused on the foreign located aspect now, we had to add foreign banks and basically the foreign equivalents of SEC or CFTC regulated entities. We've also added a new exemption for natural persons, just individuals acting on their own behalf who may be making an accommodation for a family member or something, if your brother came to you and said, I can't go to the ATM, I need some cash, I've got to go out of town, can you cash this $800 check for me right now? And you, for some reason, happen to be able to do that, you give him the cash. Well, actually, I guess not 800, let's say 1,200, so it's above the threshold. So you cash the $1,200 check, he leaves. Are you a check casher? No. We do not want to cover individuals who are not engaged in this activity for profit, who don't do it regularly. It's just a one-off accommodation for someone you know. That is not the kind of activity that we want to cover or even could possibly cover. We're not going to require individuals doing a favor for a family member to suddenly have a written AML program. It just would not work. So we think that clarification will, make sure that it's very clear that that is not the kind of activity that we're worried about.